what's up, y'all? My name's bdougie, and I'm going to really quickly go to, well, not really quickly, got 30 minutes. So I'm going to go through talking about release automation. And it's something that I've spent years as a developer, never really focusing on trying to think about cutting releases and getting those shipped into production or for consumption. But it's something that I've actually started on the path of recently in the last couple of years. I've been really focused on CI and CD automation. And I think the world of CI it's pretty, like, I don't know, fluid within the industry. Like, people know how to run tests. There's a lot of tools out there to help you do that. And then continuous delivery also pretty, it's pretty widespread throughout the developer community. So like if you're probably running your tests on Circle or GitHub Actions or something similar, maybe even Cypress, you've had some Cypress or have some Playwright tests in there. CD, you're probably using Netlify or Vercel to deploy your application. And there are other pieces to the whole workflow automation. And sorry, I didn't even call attention to this GIF, but essentially this is a perfect CI/CD workflow in motion. But I wanted to also mention there are other pieces within this automated developer workflow, which I'm going to cover. But my day job is at GitHub, and my focus is really trying to teach folks the primitives of GitHub, get them interested enough to automate portions of their workflow. And that's what I do with my team for developer relations. And workflow automation on GitHub actually it looks like GitHub Actions, but there's different pieces like the API, webhooks, authentication. That's all stuff that you get out of GitHub Actions, which I'll go into way more detail in a bit. But what I wanted to talk about really quick at this event is about NBA Jam. And I'm a big basketball fan. I'm actually really enjoying the season. It's nice getting it's not post-COVID. I don't know if I can actually say that because even this event is remote. But what I'm getting at is I enjoy watching the games. I enjoy the spectacle of the dunks, but also even the 3-point game that's happening right now in that sort of genre of gameplay. But I like talking about basketball because it's like a perfect automation. Sports is like a good analogy for automation and workflows. And the game of basketball, this is the basketball court. And I've given this talk before, so you've probably seen me at other Jamstack events give this analogy. I'll go into a different divergent, a different idea. But what I love about this analogy is usually with the game of basketball, the object is to get the ball in the opposing team's hoop. And to do that, you can just simply 2-on-2, if you're playing NBA Jam, run the ball to the other side, and then boom shakalaka. And I love that style of basketball. That's the style of basketball I grew up on, which is NBA Jam era. But as of recent, in the last about 5 to 6 years, actually probably 2013, so at this point 9 years. Sorry, math is off, 8 years. But there was a book that came out called Sprawl Ball, and they identified through Hooponomics applying statistics to the game of basketball, where they found that 31% of the shots are made from this point. And this point is because most players are right-handed, and there's the arc, and that comes into play, and it's usually hard to defend. If you know that the ball is going to go in at this point of the hoop, whether it's basketball, whether it's soccer, whatever it is, if you know there's a place where you have the best performance, you're going to optimize for that. And that's why in basketball, there are plays, there's automation that works. So you have the triangle offense, which looks like this. So the 1, 2, and 4 are making a triangle. So if the 2 gets the ball and they don't have the shot, the 31% where they're sort of optimizing for scoring, they can either kick it out to the 3 or the 4 or even the 5 at that point if you are the 2 with the ball or the 1. So you always know, no matter where you are on the court, you always can have someone to the left or the right of you. And I think with automation, it's also the same. So if you have a failure in your test, you know exactly what happens when failures happen. Like either someone gets notified, Slack notifications that a build failed, everybody gets on a call, whatever it is, something goes down in production. We set up all these sort of tools for automation so that we know we can basically have our backs, have each other's backs, have the backs of our customers, because we know exactly when things go down, what to do. And it's all in the playbook, sports through and through. So this is actually an example of one of the projects that I work on. It's called open source. I'll get into more detail, but this is the showcase of me automating my releases. So like at the end of this talk, you'll have a good understanding of like what you could do with automation, especially in releases. So this is my version 1.31 release. This is for my doc site, docs.opensource.pizza. And every single build, not only do I have atomic deploys on Netlify, I've also got everything built atomically and statically inside of my releases. So every time I cut a release, maybe it's just a bug fix, or it's a minor release, or even a full breaking changes with the website, maybe a new design, that is now stored in my release notes on GitHub. And I'm going to show you how to do that in quite a few slides. But more context, I'm a big fan of open source. I built a project to encourage me to do more open source contributions, to track my contributions, to find new projects. And that project is called Open Source. Now, Open Source is built on top of this tool called OneGraph. OneGraph actually interfaces with the GitHub GraphQL API, and then that is actually talking to a React app. And shout out to OneGraph, who was acquired by Netlify recently. And that is the bare bones of my project. And I basically built this because I wanted to have a central place for me to find new projects, to find new contributions, and I didn't want to have to go through searching random GitHub repos or on Twitter all day, or trying to figure out on Reddit like what GitHub repos are trending. So that's what I did, and I built this really as a need. I wanted to learn GraphQL back in 2016. It was super brand new for GitHub, super brand new for me. Sorry, I misspoke. It's actually 2017, but that's exactly what it was. And I built it on the notion of this quote, which is Gucci Mane, which I've always wanted to get involved in open source. And this Gucci Mane quote, this spoke to me: if you don't got sauce, then you lost, which is why I built this project, which is called Open Sauce. All right. Well, if you don't got sauce, then you lost, which is this project, Open Sauce. So I had mentioned that this talks directly to GraphQL API. On the right is a GitHub repo. On the left is the UI for Open Sauce. The way this works, I have no database. The database itself is really just a GitHub issues. And I did this intentionally because, again, I wanted to learn GitHub GraphQL API. This was a good idea for a database, which is only GitHub issues. And what's funny enough is that this is actually, I've been doing this for 5 years. This is actually a really common way to architect new side projects. We see Jam Commits, which is a cool Dusty Domains project that happened last month. That is built on GitHub Comments. And you see folks like Swix who are also using GitHub Comments. I also do that for my bdougie Live site as well. But basically, this is the interface. This is how I interact with open source. It's like the backbone of all my interactions for contributing in open source. So open source has tons of repos. There's a lot of like different angles and a lot of different languages and stuff like that we've approached. And I say we because there's a handful of contributors at this point. And we're just like trying to solve small problems. And then the cool thing about this is we solve small problems, but then we encourage other people to come along and contribute alongside of us, which I'll get into in a sec. So we've got about, at this point, 26 repos. We actually might be at 31. I think 26 is in my head, but 31 is actually the number because I checked recently. So one of the projects we shipped recently, actually over the summer, is called explore.opensource.pizza. This is built on OneGraph, their open source dashboard. For anybody who uses open source and you want to contribute, if you want to test any sort of GraphQL endpoints specifically for open source that we're leveraging, you can do that in explore.opensource.pizza. This was a quick project that was thrown together by one of our contributors, and it's maintained through a series of GitHub Actions that power the releases and ship the new updates. Oh, you know what? Okay, I keep hitting end. Sorry, first time presenting on this keyboard. And I'm going to have to realize I'm going to need to get a clicker. Okay. Okay. So explore.opensource.pizza, docs.opensource.pizza. I alluded to this earlier. This is a Docker source site. It's just a series of markdown files, just as you think of a Docker source site. It also has an Algolia endpoint where we're doing doc search with it as well. And this was also put together by a contributor, and we maintain it through a series of GitHub Actions and releases, which I'll get into. I've alluded to GitHub Actions a few times. I didn't really explain what it was. GitHub Actions is a combination of primitives, and it's a combination of primitives that are given to you for free out of all GitHub repos. So public or private repos, you can now have access to GitHub Actions. It's not only just a CI provider, so you could actually run your tests with Actions, you could also continuous deploy with Actions. So if you have a cloud provider that maybe doesn't already have atomic deploys or automatic deployments, you can do that with GitHub Actions as well. But if you don't want to do that, you don't have to do it as well either. So GitHub Action is, again, it's the combination of primitives. So the API, the webhooks, authentication, all built into one feature. And it gives you a lot of it gives you a lot of bells and whistles to leverage in your developer automation toolkit. Cool. So real quick, GitHub Actions is the feature. An action is a reproducible automation piece, but if you have a combination of actions, it's called a workflow. And I want to bring that up because sometimes that distinction can be confusing. I also want to mention that workflows are triggered by webhook events. So again, another primitive. And these webhook events could be on pull requests. It could be on just push to the repo. It could be on opened issues. It could be open cut releases. It could also be on things like starring a repo. Like all those things are webhooks inside the sort of architecture of GitHub that we allow folks to build on top of. And those are now given access pretty easily through GitHub Actions. Now, workflows include multiple jobs. And within a job, you can have 20 jobs asynchronously running inside of a workflow, inside of a repo. And inside of that repo, you could also point to third-party actions. So these are actions that could be on the GitHub Marketplace. They could be actions that I host open source inside of my repo. You can actually leverage them yourself. So just wanted to also point out you can have third-party actions outside of your project that you want to leverage. Obviously, just if you're going to leverage code on the internet, you want to make sure that it's trusted. Either you know the maintainer, or if it's the source code is viewable and licensed, that you can convince your boss to basically add to your repo. If you have a boss, not everybody has a boss. You could be working for yourself. Cool. So what I like to start with before getting to examples is you identify a repetitive task and you automate that. So if you know every single period of time there's an action that you want to run, you identify that. So every time the release is cut, I want to send a tweet out to Twitter with an example you could do today. Or maybe you want to update the Discord channel. Perhaps every time you start a repo, you want to invite somebody to an email blast. I don't know. That's all possible within webhooks and the limitation of yourself and what code you can write, or what you could find on Stack Overflow to copy and paste. So my example is every time we every time we merge a pull request, we cut a release. And that's exactly what we do on the open source projects. So here's an example of the Explore pipeline. We build the application, so every time we basically have merged, actually, we do this also in development, but every time we merge, we do go ahead and build a container which has all the files hosted inside of a Docker file, inside of a hosted container. And then from there, we then host that onto our release notes. So that way, every single release has that. You can see here, we're checking for some semantic release things. So we do conventional commits. That happens in our visualized workflow. We're moving to step 2 after we built a container and check for code standards. And then at that point, we deploy it to a static host. In our case, it's Netlify in production, but we do also use GitHub Pages for staging. So GitHub Pages also gets a mention in the middle of this. And that's mainly because it's out of sight, out of mind. Things can be hosted, and we can sort of click through that. It's great for really quick prototyping as well. And then finally, we clean up the actions. So we do decommission some artifacts if they're not needed, or we clean up any sort of stage context in some sort of cloud buckets as well. Now, the way we do this is that I mentioned the webhook. So every time there's a push to the main branch, and because in our projects, I actually protect the main branch, so you can't actually push directly unless you're a maintainer. Push to the main branch is really a merge pull request. So that's the distinction. But there are some cases where I do want to push to the main branch, like force push for a quick fix. Usually that's reserved for me, but other folks, just to mention, don't push the main branch if you don't have to. So here you can see that we have a job. I mentioned previously you could have 20 asynchronous jobs. Here we've got a job that's building our container. It's shipping our Docker file and making it reproducible for production. And this is another, oh, sorry. And then the last thing is the steps. Now, I didn't mention steps in the previous explanation, but within a job, you could have as many synchronous steps. So these are not async. These actually have to happen one after the other. But as many as you can use up to the file limit. So we have a file size limit. I forgot, actually, I don't actually know that from the top of my head. I've only seen one open source project actually hit this limit before. So you have to have like probably a couple thousand lines of steps before this actually hits a limit. But just keep in mind, there is a limit. We ask if you do hit that limit, just go ahead and break up your action file. You could also talk to actions from, you can talk to different workflow files from other workflow files. So keep that in mind if you do hit that limit. If you do hit that limit, hit me up, let me know, because I'm curious what you would be doing to hit that. But I doubt you'll hit that as well. Again, only one person in the last 3 years I've actually seen hit that. Cool. So I went through probably about 20 slides without even introducing myself. My name is bdougie. I work at GitHub. This is my MySpace page powered by GitHub Actions. And the way this works is anybody who opens up the issue on my GitHub profile, you get added to my top 8. Technically, I have more than 8 friends, so you will be like number 15 at this point. But these are my top 8 friends there. And the way I'm doing this is with another way, which is through local actions. So I mentioned you can use third-party actions. I write a bunch of scripts to do random things inside of my repos. So whether it's a script to grab environment variables and ship them locally, or if it's a script to update a README file, I could do that within a local action. And the way I do that is through a folder I have, which has a Ruby script, and it works. I've done this, actually, in particular, I do have a JavaScript script as well that's actually bumping the count of followers I have inside my README. I have a whole blog post on that, so definitely check it out. I don't have time to go into that. But did want to mention that pull request events trigger actions. So we talked about push, but there are pull request events. Here's an example of Sam, who's a community manager over at Hashnode, made a quick change to our docs. What's cool about this is that it actually triggered an action. It triggered that entire workflow that we saw inside the workflow visualizer to then push and deploy our docs into production. The other thing is that you could trigger action cloud runners. So one thing that I've done, this is something that I'm super happy that we do this now at GitHub, because it's something I've really liked about Netlify, and I still use it with Netlify, is being able to see my logs and have a runner to run deployed environments. So as of last month, all GitHub pages, the runners run on GitHub Actions. So we're actually bringing the Actions compute in the sort of forefront of a lot of the stuff we're doing with our features. So more to come on that. But here I'm actually building a statically deployed app and actually setting it up to be deployed to GitHub Pages. So here in particular, what I'm using with the Peace Iris Action GitHub Pages v3. V3 is the actual tag. So you could also run actions on branches or tags. I'm actually just deploying it to a static branch, and then that branch gets watched by Netlify. So we're not technically deploying this to GitHub Pages, but it does get shipped to Netlify. The other thing I want to point out it ships to Netlify based on the branch name. The other thing I want to point out is that we're building artifacts, so that way any previous version, just like Atomic deploys, we can actually go and check that out by actually downloading artifacts that are hosted and uploaded inside of GitHub releases. I do this thing on twitch.tv/bdougieO. I host a stream every Wednesday and Friday where I work on things like open source and also projects like Slaybot. Slaybot is like the Baybot. Baybot's a Twitch app, Twitch integration to do really cool things while I'm live on stream. And that is hosted and deployed by GitHub Actions. And I'm actually hosting a version of this and artifacts on every release inside of my GitHub repos. And the reason for that is because I'm deploying this in particular application to Azure. And in order to do that, Azure wants a zip file. And so I take my entire app, I bundle it down to a zip file that happens powered by GitHub Action, and I deploy it up and get what I do is I ship a staging environment to Azure first. That way I can test it live while I'm on stream. And then from there, if it works, I merge it in, it gets deployed to production. So this is the YAML. I don't have time to go through every single aspect of this YAML, but this is the YAML that basically powers the caching the node modules and then uploading it up to GitHub in preparation to upload the zip file to Azure. And this is the deploy staging. The one thing I will point out in line 3 is there a conditional for watching for pull request and checking that the pull request itself is closed. I'd say closed and merged because I do want to actually decommission the staging environment if the PR is closed. So that way I can make room for other things as well. And there you go. In my workflow visualizer, that's the sort of movement that's happening. I'm uploading release notes, which happens asynchronously. There's no chain of, no dependency chaining at all. But I do wait until the build is being completed, and I'm doing that condition to check if it's a staging deploy or if it's a production deploy. In this case, this was a staging deploy because it's still a PR. And here is a GitHub script, which is something I've mentioned in different various blog posts. But this GitHub script basically is going to be commenting on to, and a GitHub script is a way to write JavaScript inside of GitHub Actions. It's not as elegant as it sounds, but it's a nice way to prototype things really quickly. So what I've done is I prototyped the idea of having comments on my PRs and give me a link directly to Azure to be able to click through and see that work. The other thing I wanted to talk about is GitHub Packages. So in this sort of cycle of release automation is actually leveraging this tool called GitHub Packages. So it's pretty common to go on GitHub in the GitHub repos, look for releases, look for tarballs. But if you wanted to deploy something a little bit more than just a simple tarball, or leverage your Docker image to host and share for other folks to use in their environments, that's what we're doing with every single one of our sites inside of OpenSauce. And this is really because we now have a historical record for every single release for our site, which is the doc site, and also the other sites that we also maintain. I did want to quickly also mention another thing, which is updating release notes. There's a bit of automation that I pointed to of this sort of hosting the tarball, the zip file, and then the static distribution, which is the container, the GitHub package. But the other thing I wanted to mention is about generating release notes. So last fall, we actually shipped features to actually add a button to all your releases. So if you struggle with thinking about what was shipped from the last tag to this tag, definitely use tags if you aren't using them. There's a way to automate those with semantic versioning. I'm happy to talk about them in more detail. I don't have time today, but if you're leveraging tags, you could auto-generate releases. So if I click that button, that change that Sam made earlier is actually going to show up in our release notes here just by hitting that button. And what's cool about that is that Sam's going to get a call out of being a new first-time contributor. I didn't have to do any sort of all contributors automation or anything like that. It's just given to me for free from just simply GitHub and the release automation tool, which is built in. And not only is there a button, there's also an API. And so if you did want to automate this through some of your tooling, the only thing you need to do is when you do generate a new release is to generate release notes true inside the options flag that you send over to the API. And then we'll generate those release notes based on the template, either the default template, which what I showed you, or the template that you provide us as well. So you can set up that template inside your YAML in your .github folder. Again, don't have time to go into great detail because I only had 30 minutes to talk about this, but did also want to point out that if you check out your github.com/ your home feed, you'll see a number of different releases that are there. Some folks like Sanjay Soros is using this feature. You just check it out there in your home feed as well. And then finally, I wanted to also mention a new project that I was able to turn around and ship in only 2 weeks over the Christmas break. And the reason I was able to do this is because we already had a lot of this release and build infrastructure that we just copy and pasted over to hot OpenSauce.pizza. So this is a project. If you want to look for the hottest projects or the hottest open source projects that are looking for contributions, the second half of that is not complete yet, but we now have a feature where you can actually log in, upvote different projects. In the future, we're looking to expose like good first issues, as well as identify projects that have really good onboarding or that are looking for new contributors. So we'll have signals for that in the future. And so definitely check it out. Keep an eye on OpenSauce, the repo, and the projects. We're always looking for new contributors. We also have an entire suite of actions that also automate a lot of this stuff. So we do have actions that power the actual project OpenSauce.pizza. So if you want to learn more about that and how we're leveraging Superbase to store data for making contributions for open source, definitely hit me up and then check out Superbase. I have a slide here. I don't work for them, but I think it's a cool product, so you should definitely check it out. If you want to learn how to build MySpace in 2020, which is when I wrote that article, definitely check out that post. And then a reminder, if you don't got sauce, then you lost.
That was awesome, Brian. Oh my God. I feel like I'm going to have to go back and rewatch that in slow-mo so I can get all the information I need to know what to do. Because you like packed a ton of different features and information in there. So we do have some audience questions, and I've got some questions of my own. If anybody has additional questions, please feel free to post them in the Ask a Question module right now, and we'll be sure to get to them. So first question we've got from Mike. What's the right way to pass required info from one workflow to another? He says, I've done it with artifacts, but it feels a little dirty. I've also done it with callable workflows, but I believe they have some limitations.
Yeah, so like if it's a workflow inside of the same repo, I think callable workflows are the way to go, but you could also do another thing, which is repository dispatch. And this is the way that I originally started using it. So callable workflows I've actually never used, to be quite honest, because back before we had all these other features for GitHub Actions, repository dispatch is essentially giving you a webhook. So that way, if you want to pass data from one action to another that happens to not be in the same repo or organization, or if you want to like click a button on a website and then call an action, repository dispatch, it's pretty clean. And what I usually do with that is put it into a serverless function. Unfortunately, I don't have a ton of content around this, but I have one blog post on dev.to specifically about repository dispatch that will help you get started. I think it's the only piece of content I've done. For githubhackathon.com, that website, we ended up using repository dispatch to manage passing in authentication tokens from users that we don't have access rights to. Like we'd pass off like the very read access to their repos to the thing that we were running. It was a bit, we had a blog post with who was it? The people that used to run the conference in Spain. There was another blog post about that for the hackathon website and how we built it. So I'm happy. I don't have, unfortunately, I have a lot of details on that, a lot of great answers, but hopefully that gets you started. And also, Mike, just hit me up. I'm happy to look over your shoulder.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. That kind of probably a little over my head. I haven't needed to do that myself. So, I guess it's one of those things I'll have to, when I hit that problem, I'm going to be like, oh, now I remember Brian talked about this already. So Sean asks, how would you coordinate a GitHub workflow with a Netlify build? I actually had the same question. He said, for example, I want to run my project's test suite in a workflow, but I also don't want to wait for the entire test suite to finish before starting a Netlify build.
Yeah, so like with Netlify, the Netlify build, it can run. I guess, are they testing on the Netlify build? Because if that's the solution, or sorry, if that's the scenario they're looking for, there is an example, which is the GitHub handle is Jake Jarvis. I'll never forget that name because the alliteration. But he has a Lighthouse action to actually test on Netlify deploy previews. So I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that's what you're trying to test. You're trying to test whatever's out live in production or what's happening on Netlify servers. He's already solved to prove the pattern. And the beauty of this is it's open source. I don't know exactly how he did it, but he is waiting for the build to finish. Check out the deploy preview that gets returned. And then he's actually running Lighthouse checks specifically on Netlify deploy previews. It's the only action I've seen that specifically works only, like it works for Netlify. So like it's a really good example to look into. And the other thing I mentioned again, all actions are not all actions. The majority of actions that you can leverage, they're just GitHub repos. And they're all like, I tend to do a lot of copy and pasting of code and pointing back and forth to things that work and forking and contributing. So I would say check out Jake Jarvis's action. And then this is a question that comes up a lot for the Netlify team as well. So like the Netlify answers.netlify.com. I haven't searched for a Netlify question in a while because all my stuff kind of just works TM. But their forum is also pretty responsive, as well as github.community. So between the two forums, if you don't have an answer between what I just showed you, you could probably find an answer pretty quick in one of those forums.
And so for your project, you are deploying, you said, to GitHub Pages, but also to Netlify. So how is your Netlify? Is it just like kind of still hooked to the GitHub repo, or are you doing something different to push the code onto Netlify after
So
you do?
the Netlify, Netlify is still normal. It's just, you basically go to Netlify, point to your repo, deploys happen, and you deploy from, at that point, the main branch that deploy. The GitHub Pages thing we do specifically for local proof of concepts and confirming our static build works. It's essentially overkill. Like, you don't need to do the GitHub Pages thing in my solution, but because of where I work in my day job, like, I also want to confirm that if you wanted to use GitHub Pages, that's a solution for you as well. So I just sort of inject that example. It doesn't hurt anything to have it, a GitHub Pages branch, and then deploy that with the static function or with the Netlify runner. But yeah, but as far as like everything's normal with Netlify. I'm just pointing it to it, and it's deploying and running it in their cloud runners as well.
Okay. And so like your GitHub Pages, your use of GitHub Pages, like you said, it's overkill, is essentially doing like a preview branch in a way, but on GitHub.
Yeah. So like the thing that we shipped actually last month is now GitHub Pages runs on GitHub Actions now. So it's like we had a very small changelog announcement. It wasn't a big deal because it was in between holidays. But essentially, before, when you posted on GitHub Pages, you didn't really have any sort of insight of what happened when you ran the build.
Right.
It was sort of like set it, forget it, hope for the best. And for the most part, GitHub Pages has always been a little extra feature inside of GitHub. So if you want a quick docs proof of concept, GitHub Pages.io or GitHub.io URL, like, you have that for you. And then companies like Netlify and Vercel, they've like taken it to another level when it comes to static deployments. And at the moment, like, GitHub Pages is not really focused on like the level of introspection, everything you want to do with Netlify. But if you just want to get started, you want to get a quick portfolio site, GitHub Pages is a really good example. Doc site as well. You can leverage it there. But like, we will be shipping more features. Like, we do have multiple environments set up now. So like, that's hopefully going to set us up to be able to have staging and stuff like that for GitHub Pages down the road. But I can't put a date on it. But it's it's in the future.
Okay. Yeah, I remember, honestly, like, I got my start pushing stuff to GitHub Pages because I think that was the first place I could take my Jekyll site many years ago and push it to GitHub Pages and have it automatically build and deploy for me. You know, even before I think Netlify was around, like, this was there. So it's nice to see it finally like kind of evolving in a way to not quite, I guess, if you're looking for something more full featured, you go with somewhere else.
Yeah.
But like, if you just need to deploy simple site.
Yeah, and I would say it's no mystery that GitHub Pages is not our main focus as far as GitHub. Like, our focus is collaboration. So GitHub Pages is like an extra feature amongst that collaboration piece that we're doing. So like, if we were working on a team, or if we want to ship to the jam.dev site, like, we now have we can use GitHub Pages as our staging if we wanted to, or a place that it's sandbox. Most people might use Netlify instead because you can do multiple branch deploys, and they have a lot of really cool bells and whistles. So like, recommendation is probably use Netlify. But if you're just throwing a proof of concept, or maybe it's a new project, you just need to you don't need a team account. You already have everybody in the repo. Throw it up on a page, and then hopefully it can grow with you. And if it doesn't grow with you, then there's other options that make it easy. Just log in with GitHub.
Right. So I mean, it kind of not specifically on the GitHub Actions topic, because you brought it up, you mentioned it, and I suspect maybe a lot of people haven't even heard of it. You mentioned using Docusaurus. Like, can you tell folks a little bit about what Docusaurus is and why you used it for that project?
Yeah, so Docusaurus is it's a fully featured, like, if you think of like static site generation, it's like a static site generator built for docs. So a lot of the sort of page management, multiple markdown files, a lot of bells and whistles. The reason we chose Docusaurus is because you can actually take your entire docs and make a book. So we have an action that will print the entire doc site as PDFs. And just as if you had an O'Reilly book or a Manning book, you can have the entire open source docs as a book. It's a little underwhelming because we don't have that much docs, but in the future, the plan is to eventually have some intro to open source content there. And then you could essentially just like grab the PDF and go look at it, like look at it through on an airplane or airplane mode. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. I didn't even know that feature. I remember when I've looked at it, I mean, it has some kind of navigation and other types of things that like you typically want in docs. And the other thing
Yeah.
that I thought was cool that people probably, if you're doing docs can be really important is the fact that it has versioning for like, so like if
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
so yeah,
We haven't
so
got that far
sometimes
yet.
yeah, but that is one of those things. It was like, okay, I need to get to the docs for version X kind of thing, if I recall. So anyway, um, awesome. So there was another thing, kind of, sort of not related to GitHub Actions specifically that you mentioned that I thought was kind of cool that I have seen a lot of people doing a lot more of, which is kind of, I wouldn't call it using GitHub as a CMS, but it is like GitHub as a data source, like one of the many data sources that's supplying things to my application, like using comments coming from GitHub or using, or even pulling content from directly from GitHub, almost like, actually I have seen it used directly as a CMS, not even necessarily
Yeah.
using like pulling the files, you actually calling the API and getting. So have you done much with that? I mean, or is it some? I'm
Yeah.
curious what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, done much is the understatement. So like bdougie Live, which is my main website, all the blog posts are actually GitHub issues. So I think Swix does a very similar pattern for his, not his blog
Yeah.
posts, but his comments as well. Well, Swix, I throw that name like everybody knows who he is, but hopefully people know who he is. But yeah, so all blog posts on bdougie Live are actually issues, GitHub issues, and all the comments are GitHub comments on those issues. There's a GitHub open source project called Utterances, which you can embed GitHub comments from issues onto your website. So if you want to open up an issue like, Monday, all user feedback and that little chat bubble on the bottom, you can just connect that directly to a GitHub issue. And then now you're able to source that. There was another one that I don't remember the name where it connects to GitHub Discussions. This is another open source project. Got like 5,000 stars. So it seems like it's been around for a bit. And I just learned of it yesterday. But the answer to that question, my original pathway into using GitHub as a service or as a backend, essentially, is open source. Open source itself, the entire backend, if you log in with open source, we create a repo on your behalf, and then we install open source onto that repo with the GitHub app, which is a whole nother world that I didn't get into in the talk. But that gives us the ability for you to track open source contributions you want to make. We can also look at open source contributions you've made for the specific repo you're saving as a GitHub issue. And we can store all the data inside the issue as like metadata, which we do in between the issue and some JSON files that we throw in the repo as well. So that way, if you decide, you know what, I don't want open source to know what I'm working on, private that repo, like we won't see it basically. As well as if you wanted to basically just delete the repo, you could do that as well. And then once you delete the repo, you remove yourself as an open source user. So there's no database other than Supabase. Supabase is a whole nother another conversation that I can answer, but there's no real database for open source.pizza specifically. It's just all GitHub repos that the
Okay.
user owns.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, I was going to ask exactly that. It sounded like pretty much it's just pulling data from different places in GitHub and assembling it.
Yeah, and
That
that's the like I know what I've always in the whole Jamstack architecture. The one thing I've never wanted to do is start paying money for other people to use my cool idea.
yeah.
So with GitHub, it's free up to 2,000 minutes for actions. It's also free for you to create a public repo or even a private repo. So if you just let me create that one repo for you and then have access to only that one repo in your account, we can make this open source connection work between us or between you and the app. And yeah, that's part of the reason why I built it this way is because I never wanted the popularity of a project, which to be quite frank, the popularity is very low. I didn't want it to basically cost me money.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. It is one of those things like you don't want if you're starting a side project, like one of the deterrents can be like once you have to start paying a ton of money for
Yeah.
things to keep it running, it's
First
like,
thing I look at.
Yeah, yeah. So I hear
Yeah.
you. I've been there. Oh God, I remember the days when like any project I released on the web, I had to buy. I'm like, oh, I need a database server and I need to pay for web hosting and all. So yeah, things have gotten a lot better.
Yeah, I don't mind if for my work, if we could spin up a database server and pay for the service, it's like, oh, sure, work's paying for it. But if it's like this is not a work project,
Mhm.
yeah, we're doing the ultimate free plan. If there's no open source plan, I'm looking at the pricing page and like, okay, like most authenticated, like off zero and stuff like that, it's 10,000 users. And my joke is if I hit 10,000 users, I'm going to get VC funded because at that point I've got product market fit or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm just using all the free tiers of everything.
Cool. And so I think you kind of mentioned it during the presentation, but when I started with GitHub Actions, I mean, you showed a lot of YAML, right? It's
Yeah.
YAML, right?
Yep.
So a lot of YAML, but it's like you don't actually have to know how to do all that stuff. I mean, I was building some, I wouldn't call them super complex, but they did some decent stuff, and I was just pulling from community ones out there and just assembling them together. So
Yeah.
yeah, tell people like where can they find all the community ones? Like I know there's even like you can search for them and things like that, and just add them to your repo.
Yeah. So there's the GitHub Marketplace where you could search specifically. So like if you want an AWS action or if you want an action that connects to Lighthouse, that's the best place to start. If you want like an action, which we basically most of those actions are from partners. It's like AWS, Google, Microsoft. But there's another repo, which is Sarah Drasner, which I think a lot of other folks might know. So Draz on GitHub, she has this repo called Awesome Actions, which folks basically contribute to the README and add their action in the list. So it's all organized based on category. So if you're looking for actions to manage your JWTs, or you're looking for actions to use GitHub as a CMS, which there's a couple of them that are out there, you could, just check out that repo and you'll find an unlimited amount of list.
Cool. I have to check that one out. I know I use the regular like searching through the marketplace. I would say like sometimes I came across like 10 and it was really hard to tell which one was the good one to use. So I was often like just plugging them in. Okay, that one didn't really work the way I thought it would, and taking it out. So,
Yeah, there's quite a few out there, and I think GitHub stars is not the best indication for like popularity. But I usually a combination of GitHub stars, last commit, contributor, how many contributors are on the team, or how many open issues. Funny enough, I mentioned Superbase, so I'm actually creating this little side project, this algorithm to figure out popularity of GitHub repos. And I'm basically taking open source users, trying to see the stuff that they submit on open source in star on GitHub, and doing a very secretive algorithm, which is there's an open issue about it in the repo if you want to get the details. But essentially, a combination of like how recent and how popular it is. To then start recommending projects. So I'd like to do something specifically for GitHub Actions. I want to like massage the original project first.
Okay. Sounds like a little bit of like the Colonel's secret 11 herbs and spices.
Exactly. Yeah. 11 urban spices in an open source repo in an issue. It's just listed right there.
Yeah. On a project about pizza. Uh,
Exactly.
So, and one last thing before we finish. So, you talk about the NBA. Who's your team? I always forget. Who's your team?
Yeah. So Orlando Magic, because I'm from Florida, Orlando Magic has always been my team, but
Really?
they
I'm
don't play them
sorry.
out here in California. So, it's funny. Right before I moved to California, the last day before, like the day before got on a plane, I went to a Magic game, and it was like the last game of the season, and they lost like 81 games, like or
Yeah.
whatever. Like it was, I think they won 3 games that year. So whatever the max games that you can play, they won 3 of them. It was a really deflating experience. Empty arena, they're losing, and it's a bunch of people you never heard of because everybody's hurt. So that I got on a plane to Oakland, and that year, that was their first championship year with the Warriors and Steph Curry. And I was like, you know what? I'm a Warriors fan now. It's different when you watch a team that's winning versus a team that never wins. So I'm like, you know what? I feel better when I watch the Warriors as versus when I watch the Magic. The Magic, I feel
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah. You can't let go of your home team though. I feel you. I'm lucky because my home team's the Heat, and well, we're pretty good. So,
Nice.
but yeah,
Yeah,
next time you're in
not too many
Orlando,
bad years.
we're going to go to a Magic game. And if they play the Heat tend to lose to them for reasons I can't explain. But anyway, so
Yeah,
yeah,
guaranteed at least 4 games a year they'll win. And
Yeah. All right, Brian, this was awesome. Really, really grateful you came out to join us. I learned a lot, and I definitely going to go back and rewatch that. So thanks again.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of the day.